Today, we're examining a truly fascinating video essay that breaks down the psychological and behavioral divide between two very distinct archetypes. We have the foolish person on one side and the clever person on the other.
And this isn't just a surface level look. It really gets into the mechanics of why people act the way they do.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to decode these two extremes. We want to figure out why the people who constantly end up broken, exhausted, and defeated in life are usually not the poorest people or the least educated, but rather the most emotionally naive.
Yeah, that's the real trap.
And on the flip side, we want to dissect why the people sitting at the very top of the hierarchy are usually not the ones breaking their backs with physical labor, but the ones who have mastered a specific type of cleverness.
What's fascinating here is that the material forces us to completely strip away our romanticized fairy tale views of human society. It demands that we look at social interactions purely through the lens of emotional regulation and strategic restraint.
Which is hard for a lot of people to do.
Oh, absolutely. Because we are culturally conditioned to believe that putting good intentions into the universe automatically yields good results. Karma or just general fairness. But this framework, it doesn't care about how we wish the world worked. It is a strictly impartial look at the mechanics of how human dynamics actually function.
Okay, let's unpack this because the very first thing we need to do is redefine a core piece of vocabulary. When we hear the word fool, the immediate association is usually, well, someone with a low IQ, right?
Right, like someone who is slow to process information.
Exactly. Someone who struggles with complex academic concepts or whatever. But in this behavioral paradigm, intelligence has absolutely nothing to do with it. A fool is strictly defined as an emotional fool.
And that distinction is vital. I mean, you can hold a doctorate, you can run an entire portrait department, and still be an absolute emotional fool.
Wait, really? Even at that level?
Oh, for sure. This archetype describes a person who takes every smiling face as a genuine friend. When they hear a sweet word or a flattering compliment, their internal processing system immediately files it away as absolute truth.
Without even questioning it.
Exactly. Zero secondary screening for motive. None.
So they operate with a wide open heart but a completely closed mind, which is such a paradox when you think about it.
It really is.
You'd think being open-hearted means you're taking in all the information around you, being receptive, but they are actually ignoring a massive subset of data. They judge people exclusively by the words coming out of their mouths. They never pause to analyze the underlying intentions behind those words.
Because the mechanism driving that behavior is actually a form of cognitive bias. The emotional fool is essentially projecting their own internal landscape onto everyone they meet.
Oh, I see. So it's like a mirror.
Precisely. Their internal logic dictates a very simple equation. They think, if my intentions are pure and I am a good person, the world will naturally reflect that goodness back to me.
Which sounds lovely, but it's completely unrealistic.
Right. But to process social interactions any other way would create massive cognitive dissonance for them. It's much easier, psychologically speaking, for them to believe the world is inherently fair than to accept the uncomfortable reality that they need to, develop a thicker skin.
But the reality check here is that the world behaves in the exact opposite manner. If you project goodness onto someone who is inherently manipulative, you aren't changing their nature. You're just volunteering to be their next target.
And because the naive person gives their trust away so cheaply, it creates this vacuum. And opportunists naturally step right into that vacuum.
Like sharks smelling blood in the water.
That's a great way to put it. The emotional fool lacks the critical thinking required to see that by constantly forgiving people who wrong them, by constantly turning the other cheek without enforcing any actual consequences, they aren't actually being noble.
They think they are, though.
They do, but they're not. They are actively inviting exploitation. Predators in any social or corporate ecosystem quickly recognize when someone runs purely on emotion and lacks defensive boundaries.
I think we need to upgrade the metaphor here, actually. It's not just about running on a treadmill of bad decisions. Operating this way is like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom.
I like that.
Right. The emotional fool's energy output is staggering. They are constantly pouring love, effort, and trust into their relationships. But because there are no boundaries, which is the hole in the bucket, the retention of goodwill or respect is absolutely zero.
It all just drains out.
Exactly. They drain themselves completely, trying to prove their worth to people who are literally just watching the water leak out.
An observant individual spot that leak immediately. They recognize the emotional fool and realize, hey, there was an opportunity here to extract value without having to provide any in return, which naturally brings us to the societal response to this archetype.
Yeah, and this is where the framework gets deeply uncomfortable. Like, if you are listening to this on your commute right now or while grabbing your morning coffee, this next part might feel like a push to the gut.
It is definitely harsh.
Because we are taught from kindergarten to be open, to share our feelings, to look for the helpers. But according to the source, what does the emotional fool actually get in return for their radical vulnerability?
They get consumed. I mean, the analysis is brutally blunt about the mechanics of this consumption.
How does that actually play out behaviorally?
Well, one of the primary behavioral markers of the emotional fool is a complete lack of impulse control over their tongue. Because they crave connection and validation so much, they just overshare.
Oh man, the oversharer, we all know one.
Right. They take things that strategically should be kept under lock and key, their deepest insecurities, their unformed plans, their financial fears, and they just broadcast them to anyone who shows even a passing interest.
They essentially hand over the instruction manual on how to dismantle their own life. I mean, if you tell a manipulative colleague exactly what makes you insecure, you have just handed them the exact weapon they need to undermine you in the next meeting.
Exactly. You've armed your own enemies. And furthermore, because their decision-making process is tethered to these fluctuating emotional states, they make incredibly rash choices.
Because they're just acting on impulse.
Right. They don't weigh long-term outcomes. They act on the immediate feeling of the moment. And when those impulsive decisions inevitably collapse into failure, or when the people they trusted with those deep secrets use the information against them, the fool experiences a catastrophic breakdown.
They just fall apart.
They cry, they scream, they fall apart publicly. And the saddest part is, in that moment of collapse, their underlying expectation is that society will rush in, form a circle around them, and offer sympathy.
Okay, if I can push back on this just a little. Is it really so wrong to expect sympathy when you're broken? I mean, if I see someone completely fall apart, my instinct isn't to exploit them, it's to help them. Is the source telling us the world is an inherently evil place just waiting to exploit us? That feels incredibly bleak.
I get why it feels that way. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text isn't declaring that empathy doesn't exist, nor is it taking a moral stance that the world is cartoonishly evil.
So what is it saying?
It is impartially describing the macro-level transactional nature of human society. While individual friends or family members might offer sympathy, the broader social and professional ecosystems do not support the weak. They laugh at them.
Wow.
Yeah. People who display chronic emotional leakage and lack of self-regulation are viewed by the collective solely through the lens of utility. The group doesn't ask, how can we heal this person?
Right. They aren't a therapy group.
Exactly. The subconscious question the collective asks is, how can this person's lack of boundaries serve my objectives?
Viewed solely through the lens of utility, that is heavy. But honestly, it makes absolute sense when you look at high-pressure environments. If you are constantly having emotional crises at work, management doesn't view you as a tragic hero. They view you as a liability.
A massive liability.
And because the emotional fool fundamentally misunderstands this dynamic, they live in a state of constant low-grade terror. They are terrified of people changing their minds or abandoning them because they have basically outsourced their entire sense of safety to the approval of external forces.
That's spot on. And to compensate for that persistent fear of abandonment, they substitute strategy with blind effort.
What does blind effort look like in this context?
It means they work incredibly hard at pleasing everyone. They're constantly shifting their behavior to accommodate the desires of whoever happens to be in front of them at the time.
Oh, like a chameleon, but out of fear.
Right. But because human desires are fickle and constantly changing, this hard work is entirely directionless. It is immense physical and emotional labor with zero structural progress.
Okay, so if the baseline problem is that the fool leads entirely with their heart, I have to assume the survival strategy requires completely severing the heart from the equation. Like, if oversharing and vulnerability lead to absolute ruin, does the clever person operate like a hyper-rational robot? How does the clever mind actually navigate this landscape without becoming a complete sociopath?
And that is the crucial nuance in this behavioral paradigm. The clever person is indeed the strategic inverse of the emotional fool, but they are not dead inside.
They aren't.
No, not at all. They haven't excised their humanity or their capacity to feel. The distinction lies entirely in the processing. The clever person simply prioritizes their brain over their heart when navigating external environments.
Interesting.
They acknowledge that emotions are real and valid, sure, but they understand a fundamental rule of power. Emotions are meant to be processed privately, They're never to be displayed publicly as a reactionary reflex.
So it's not about lacking feelings, it's about recognizing that your feelings are your own private data. And displaying that data in real time to, unvetted people is exactly what gives them the leverage to manipulate you.
Oh, precisely. You don't hand over your data. And this internal regulation manifests outwardly in a few very specific ways. Where the fool lacks control of their tongue, the clever person utilizes silence as a primary tool.
They just don't talk.
They speak very, very little. And the strategic mechanism behind this silence is profound. By not filling the air with their own thoughts, they force other people to fill the void.
Oh, because people hate awkward silences.
Yes. People naturally rush to fill the quiet. And when others talk, they reveal their motives, their insecurities, and their agendas. The clever person just listens, calculates the potential impact of their own words, and only speaks when they have determined exactly how a sentence will alter the power dynamic.
They treat their words like physical currency. You don't just throw handfuls of cash out the window because you feel excited in the moment. You invest it where it yields an actual return.
That's exactly it.
And by gathering all that intelligence through observation, they build these crystal clear mental categories for the people in their lives. The emotional fool is looking at this blurry painting where everyone is a potential best friend. But the clever person operates with a high-definition map.
A very detailed map.
Right. They know exactly who is a tested ally, who is a hidden detractor, who actually cares for their well-being, and who is only tethered to them for selfish transactional reasons.
And because there is no ambiguity in their social map, they are immune to that paralyzing fear of abandonment that tortures the fool. The clever person accepts human nature as it actually is, not as they wish it to be.
They see the reality.
They operate on the baseline assumption that most people are driven by self-interest. Therefore, if a transactional relationship ends or someone leaves, their world doesn't shatter. There is no cognitive dissonance because they expected self-interest to eventually dictate the outcome.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the part that feels like it belongs in a psychological thriller or something.
Oh, the camouflage.
Yes. The material points out that the clever person doesn't just sit in the corner brooding quietly. Despite being incredibly sharp and perceptive, the clever person will actively roam among their competitors or even their outright enemies, purposely pretending to be a fool.
It is the ultimate form of social camouflage.
I mean, that is just brilliant.
The mechanism here relies entirely on the ego of the opponent. When a predator or a competitor encounters someone who appears slightly slow, overly agreeable, or non-threatening, their own ego inflates.
They get overconfident.
Exactly. Their defensive walls drop because they subconsciously categorize the so-called fool as unworthy of their strategic attention.
They purposely invite underestimation. They play small. They let the toxic coworker or the aggressive competitor think, oh, this person isn't a threat. I don't need to worry about them. And they use that artificially manufactured blind spot to execute massive, complex plans that are kept strictly locked inside their own heads.
And they never brag about what they are building. They never announce their next move.
They let the opponent's arrogance act as a shield for their own ambition. That is wild.
But you have to realize, this strategy requires an immense amount of discipline. Human beings have a natural, almost biological urge to prove their intelligence and assert their dominance. To willingly let someone think you are less capable than you are, simply to secure a tactical advantage. That goes against every instinct of the ego.
It's so hard to bite your tongue when someone is talking down to you.
It really is. But the clever person knows that the temporary sting of being underestimated is a tiny, tiny price to pay for the freedom to operate unnoticed.
Makes total sense.
Furthermore, their approach to labor is entirely different. Where the fool uses blind, exhausting effort to please everyone, the clever person uses directed effort. They expend significantly less physical energy, but they strike at the exact leverage points that actually move the needle.
Okay, so we've mapped out these two massive extremes. On one side, we have the emotional fool who bleeds their insecurities everywhere, projects a fairy tale goodness onto a ruthless world, and gets slowly eaten alive by the collective. And on the other side, we have the calculating, hyper-observant, cleverly camouflaged strategist who weaponizes silence and turns their opponent's egos against them. So how does this framework synthesize these ideas? What is the ultimate takeaway, like the middle path for someone trying to integrate this into their actual life?
The synthesis provided in the text offers a very definitive final verdict, and it introduces an important cultural nuance here. It states unequivocally that you should not be a betrayer.
Okay.
The specific term referenced in the source is dhokebaz, which is a Hindi concept that goes beyond just lying. It implies being a fraud or maliciously deceiving people purely to cause them harm or ruin.
Right, so you're not supposed to be a villain.
Exactly. The framework explicitly rejects that behavior. However, it mandates that you absolutely must not be a fool. The ideal state of being the ultimate behavioral goal here is distilled into 3 distinct traits. You must be silent, dangerous, and clever.
Silent, dangerous, and clever. I love the rhythm of that. But let's be honest, the word dangerous carries a lot of baggage.
It does sound intense.
Yeah, I mean, if someone is just trying to navigate a slightly toxic office environment or prepping for a high-stakes negotiation with a vendor, how do they apply a dangerous mindset without becoming totally paranoid or hostile?
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally define danger in a social context. Within this framework, being dangerous does not mean you are a threat to innocent people. It doesn't mean you are aggressive or mean or hostile.
Then what does it mean?
It simply means you are a fortress. You are entirely unexploitable. You possess boundaries that have real enforceable teeth. A dangerous person is someone who, when pushed, will not fold.
Oh, I see. It's the difference between a garden gate left wide open and a reinforced steel door. You don't have to attack anyone, but if someone tries to kick your door down, they are going to break their own foot.
Exactly. To be dangerous means you possess the discipline to pause and read the room before acting. You take the necessary time to rigorously test someone's character to see how they handle small disagreements or minor inconveniences before you hand over your premium trust.
You don't just give it away.
Right. You observe the gap between what people say and what they actually do. You identify who is genuine and who is merely performing. And most importantly, you protect your inner thoughts, your vulnerabilities, and your long-term strategies until action is absolutely required.
You know exactly what to say, when to say it, and importantly, where to say it. And the material actually concludes with a fascinating little meta-commentary, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
It notes that if the words in this analysis sting like, if hearing about the foolish archetype makes you feel defensive or uncomfortable, it means the truth hit the right target. It's designed to be an intellectual wake-up call.
Yeah, if you're bristling right now listening to this, it might be because you recognize a few too many of those emotional leaks in your own past behavior.
Totally.
It is a deliberate provocation by the source. The discomfort is the mechanism that shakes you out of complacency. Because growth rarely happens when we are constantly reassured that our flawed strategies are perfectly fine.
So what does this all mean as we wrap up this deep dive? Let's summarize the psychological journey we just took. We started by diagnosing the fatal flaws of the emotional fool, right? Someone who navigates a transactional reality with an unguarded heart, but a closed mind.
Yeah, projecting that illusion of universal fairness.
Exactly, projecting that illusion onto people who view them solely as a resource to be extracted. We looked at how their lack of verbal discipline and boundary enforcement inevitably leads to exhaustion and exploitation. And then we contrasted that tragedy with the quiet architecture of the clever mind.
The strategist.
The strategist who categorizes human relationships with absolute clarity, weaponizes silence to gather intelligence, directs their efforts toward high-leverage outcomes, and possesses the immense discipline required to let competitors underestimate them.
And the transition from that first archetype to the latter is the definitive key to not just surviving, but thriving in complex social hierarchies. It requires a fundamental shift from seeking external validation to cultivating internal regulation.
Consider this deep dive a masterclass in protecting your most valuable non-renewable resources, your time, your emotional energy, and your future ambitions. Remember that your trust is a premium asset, not a free promotional flyer.
Very well said.
Stop handing over the keys to your psychological house just because someone flashes you a polite smile in the hallway. Make people earn their way into your inner circle through consistent, vetted behavior.
Which leaves us with one final, perhaps unsettling thought to mull over as you go about your week.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we look critically at modern culture today, we're constantly bombarded with messaging that preaches the absolute virtues of total authenticity.
Oh yeah, everywhere you look.
The dominant narrative tells us to live our truth out loud, to embrace radical vulnerability in all spaces, and to broadcast our deepest struggles to the world in the name of connection.
Especially on social media.
Exactly. But based on the stark mechanical realities we've uncovered in today's deep dive, we have to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is this modern, relentless push for extreme public vulnerability actually conditioning a massive segment of the population to be the exact emotional fools that society will inevitably exploit.
That is a terrifying thought.
Is true power, true safety, and true freedom actually found in the very behaviors society tells us to abandon, like hiding our cards, rigorously guarding our emotional data, and choosing to stay quietly, observantly dangerous?
Wow. That is definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.